What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the movie Nosferatu. Here's a quick synopsis. In 1838, in an attempt to join a real estate firm, newly married Thomas Hutter agrees to travel to Transylvania against his wife Ellen's wishes to sell property to the mysterious Count Orlok. Standout performances. I did not watch the polarizing show The Idol. My only experience watching Lily Rose Depp was in David Michôd's The King, which I thought she was fine in. Her as Ellen is a big step up. It's a leading role, and she's asked to do a whole lot. She's playing someone who is misunderstood by the time she's living in, and it's not one of those performances where it's all about the dialogue. She has to convey so many emotions just with her face. The fear for a role like this is that she becomes a damsel in distress, and luckily with this movie, that was not the case. I was particularly impressed with her during the film's ending. I get that in today's society, we're all obsessed with talking about Nepo babies, but I'm just here to say that I believe Lily Rose Depp is a good actress, and if you watch Nosferatu and disagree, you're not watching the same movie as me. Playing opposite Depp is Nicholas Hoult. This is the second year in a row that Hoult has a vampire movie out. In 2023, he was the star of Renfield, a movie that portrayed Dracula in a fun modern way. What's interesting to me about this movie is it's Hoult being a full-on movie star with charisma. He's not doing an accent. He's really playing off of his own likability, and you can forget that Hoult has that in him, because in most movies, he loses himself. He's just a super versatile actor with both leading man qualities and shape-shifting abilities. Nosferatu sees him playing Thomas, Ellen's husband, who is trying to become successful to make a better life. Hoult believably plays someone who is terrified of the situation he's been put in. Alright, let's talk about the actor playing the vampire, Bill Skarsgard. Bill Skarsgard is the second Skarsgard to work with writer-director Robert Eggers. The first was Alexander Skarsgard, who gave a career-best performance as the lead of the Northman. However, after watching his performance in Nosferatu, the Skarsgard who Bill has most in common with acting-wise is his father, Stellan Skarsgard, who will completely transform for a role and change his voice in a way that you forget who you're watching. Stellan has done this in King Arthur, the Pirate of the Caribbean films, and more recently in the Dune movies. And for Bill, his most prominent roles to date see him doing a similar thing in the It movies as Pennywise and now as Count Orlok. In Nosferatu, his voice and Stellan's voice in Dune are jarring and unrecognizable, and what I admire most about that is clearly both these actors are just willing to do whatever is best for the movies they are in. These performances are not going to get a ton of adulation because it's hard to identify with an actor when they do fully change their appearances for a role. You don't win Oscars doing what Skarsgård does in this movie. It's not a look at me role, and I know Bill Skarsgård is now viewed as a horror icon at this point, but he's also done stellar work in non-horror films, specifically in The Devil All the Time and John Wick Chapter 4. The performance in Nosferatu that clicked with me the most comes from Aaron Taylor Johnson, who plays Frederick, who doesn't believe anything supernatural is going on. I think this past year was an example of what I want from Johnson to come into a movie and completely take it over. He not only stole Nosferatu, but also The Fall Guy. It's worth noting that the one movie of his that didn't work was Kraven the Hunter. My point is, I know many people want him to be a leading man, to be the next James Bond. I would just rather him play a Bond villain than a bland leading character. I've said this before, if he were to be the next James Bond, I would want it to be more of an action comedy and directed by David Leitch, who directed Taylor Johnson in both Bullet Train and The Fall Guy. Emma Corrin in Nosferatu plays Anna, Frederick's wife, who is in between when it comes to her feelings about Ellen. She wants nothing more than to help her friend, but she doesn't truly believe there's something sinister going on. The scenes between Corrin and Depp are some of the best scenes in the movie. Corran had a big 2024 with Nosferatu and Deadpool and Wolverine, where they played Cassandra Nova. The unsung hero of this iteration of Nosferatu is Ralph Ineson. This is Ineson's third film with Eggers after The Witch and The Northman. In Nosferatu, he plays Dr. Wilhelm Sievers, and I got to say he really reminds me of the late great Alan Rickman in that he has a similar distinct voice, but also like Rickman, Ineson is a powerful presence in films. I loved his work in David Lowery's The Green Knight, where he plays the titular character. He's going to become an even bigger name as he's next going to play Galactus in the upcoming film The Fantastic Four: First Steps. And finally, Willem Dafoe has become a staple in Robert Eggers movies, beginning with The Lighthouse, where he's given incredible dialogue. He should have gotten an Oscar nomination for that. The Northman, where he plays a jester. His scene with Ethan Hawke is incredible. Dafoe's connection to this movie is fascinating. He played Max Schreck, the original actor who played Count Orlok in the 1922 film In the Movie Shadow of a Vampire, for which Dafoe was Oscar nominated. In Nosferatu, Dafoe plays Professor von Franz, who is the only person in the movie who believes that Ellen is telling the truth. We've all become so used to Willem Dafoe being good in films that you can overlook him. This year alone, he was in Yorgos Lanthimos' Kinds of Kindness, Tim Burton's Beetlejuice, Jason Reitman's Saturday Night, and Eggers' Nosferatu. Let's talk about the writer-director of Nosferatu, Robert Eggers. After his first 3 films, Robert Eggers already gained a reputation as someone who is obsessed with every detail of the movie he's making. Whether or not you love the term, he's an auteur filmmaker, and he's emerged as one of the faces of horror, which is interesting because yes, The Witch is a straight-up horror film, but The Lighthouse is a movie that to me defies genre, and The Northman is an epic. Nosferatu is a return to horror. What I loved about The Lighthouse and The Northman are the performances in those movies, particularly with The Lighthouse. I mean, Robert Pattinson going head-to-head with Willem Dafoe. I know Pattinson doesn't get the strong dialogue like Dafoe, but he convincingly goes mad as the character, and Willem Dafoe in The Lighthouse, as I said earlier, gives one of these signature performances of his career. And in The Northman, you have Alexander Skarsgård, who's perfectly cast as someone who thinks he's the hero of the movie, Anya Taylor-Joy, who is so good playing these characters with mystical insights, and Nicole Kidman, who I think should have gotten an Oscar nomination. The scene where she tells her son what his father was really like is beyond brilliant. Robert Eggers has long been attached to make Nosferatu. It was at one point going to be his second movie, and I'm going to be honest, I think that would have been best case scenario, because while it's very good, Nosferatu is more straightforward than The Lighthouse and The Northman, and because it's a remake, it's a story we are all very much aware of. The performances are strong, and it's visually top-notch. There's just nothing about the movie that shocked me. There was no big surprise, which there was in his other movies. Like, I just rewatched The Northman, and I'm still so blown away by that movie as much as I am with The Lighthouse. And there's a real part of me that thinks it's unfair to judge Eggers against his own work, but that's human nature. I've seen Robert Eggers movies, and because of how much I love them, I have super high expectations whenever this guy makes a movie. I know a lot of critics and pundits are talking about the fact that this movie stays true to who Robert Eggers is as a filmmaker, and I see that visually. It's up there with his other films. I just don't think you leave the movie theaters going, what is that thing that I just saw? The way that I did with The Lighthouse, the way that I did for The Northman. The mystery just isn't there like it was for those other films. I mean, there's so many hidden meanings of The Lighthouse with the light, and The Northman with how you should feel about the film's protagonist. And maybe upon rewatch, I'll find that in Nosferatu as well, but for now, I think of it as just a straight-up vampire flick, and that's absolutely more than okay. And I fully understand why he made this movie. It's a real passion. I just view him as one of those directors who should be concentrating on making fully original films. Robert Eggers has made films that that take place in the past. The Witch in 1630 New England, The Lighthouse in 1890s New England, The Northman in 895 AD Iceland, and Nosferatu in 1800s Germany. And don't expect a movie that takes place in modern times anytime soon. Here's what Eggers himself told The Ringer's Sean Fennessy during press for The Lighthouse when asked by the podcast host, "Are you going to keep doing things in the complex past?" Quote, "So far, that's all I've ever written, and I think I would be bored if I made a contemporary movie, or I would be spinning my wheels researching things that didn't matter at all and obsessing over wallpaper in a way that doesn't actually matter for a contemporary movie. So it's just fun to do it like this." End quote. A common critique against Eggers is that he's more obsessed with the look and feel of his films over the plot. This is an age-old criticism, style over substance, that I don't care for, especially given the fact that most films look bad. Eggers and his cinematographer Jaron Blaschke have made some of the best-looking movies this past decade, and the look of the film is the biggest strength of Nosferatu. Many people have brought up the fact that it is surprising that Chris Columbus, the writer of Gremlins and the Goonies, and the director of the two original Home Alone films, is a producer on Nosferatu, and after thinking about it, it makes sense to me. Eggers is a director who loves building out the worlds of his movies, and Columbus has vast experience doing that, directing the first two Harry Potter films and producing the third one. The attention to detail in those films are impressive, to say the least. After watching Nosferatu, I started to think about other vampire movies I liked, and there are 3 that have really clicked for me. And sorry to say, none of them are Twilight. They are Bram Stoker's Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola. Gary Oldman gives an all-time fearless performance as Dracula. The dynamic between him and Winona Ryder in that film is riveting. It also has Sir Anthony Hopkins and Keanu Reeves. Bash the accent all you want, he's good in that movie. Then you have Interview with the Vampire. Tom Cruise is a terrific villain as Christian. Kirsten Dunst as Claudia gives a breakout turn, and I don't think it's the best Brad Pitt has been, but he's still interesting. And that gets me to my all-time favorite vampire film, Only Lovers Left Alive, from the great Jim Jarmusch. Tilda Swinton as Eve, in my opinion, has never been better. It's the best Tom Hiddleston has been in a non-Marvel film, and Mia Wasikowska comes in and steals the movie altogether. What I loved about that movie, and the same goes for Interview with the Vampire, they explore the sadness of immortality. That to me is what's interesting about vampires. I suppose I'm just way more interested in that aspect of vampires than them being portrayed as blood-sucking monsters. Box office. Nosferatu is far and away the biggest hit of Eggers' career so far. The film has made just under $105 million, and I'm not that surprised. Horror films thrive at the box office, and people do love vampire films. You do wonder what the success of this movie means for Robert Eggers moving forward. Like, I want him to continue to make movies on a grand scale. Like I said, I also want to see him make original films. I want to see him make big movies with the actors he's already worked with. I want him to continue to work with the likes of Willem Dafoe. I want him to re-team with Robert Pattinson and Anya Taylor-Joy as well. Eggers is a writer-director who you want to see work in every different kind of genre, and I hope he just doesn't get swept up in horror films. Oscar chances. I believe the only major category that's in play for this movie is cinematography. Jaron Blaschke was previously nominated for shooting The Lighthouse. Robert Eggers is a filmmaker due for an Oscar nomination, but it's not going to happen with Nosferatu. And that's the other thing that's really interesting about the future of Robert Eggers, because his career could really go down in 2 different paths. I mean, he could become someone like Yorgos Lanthimos, who makes these weird movies and ends up getting a lot of awards, or he could end up being a studio filmmaker after the success of Nosferatu. I don't know how willing he is to continue to make indie films with A24. I mean, he hasn't made a film with A24 since The Lighthouse. His films have gotten bigger and bigger with The Northman and Nosferatu. But the other thing you hear about Robert Eggers over and over again is he is a filmmaker who wants complete and utter control. I think I'm on an island with this take, but I want to explore it more. And it's this idea that I believe Nosferatu would have been the perfect second film for Robert Eggers. I mean, looking back, he was coming off of The Witch. If he had made Nosferatu, he would have caught the eyes of everyone. We would have been like, oh wow, look at what this guy is capable of. Can you imagine what his next films are going to be like? But instead, after The Witch, he makes this film in The Lighthouse that blows everyone away. And everything with that film feels like something we've never seen before. The look of that movie, the black and white, the aspect ratio. People are still talking about The Lighthouse. And then with The Northman, you can say that's more of a straightforward action epic, but it's also super surprising what he did with the Nicole Kidman character, what he did with Alexander Skarsgård's character. As good as I think Nosferatu is, and it's better than 90% of the other movies out there right now, it's just not up there with the likes of The Lighthouse and The Northman. I think those are far better films. And listen, I'm not someone who believes that a director has to top themselves with every film that they make. I just think there was a lot of hype surrounding this film, and for the most part, the movie lived up to that hype. I just didn't think it rivaled his other movies. It didn't get to that oh my God, what am I watching level that The Lighthouse rose to, that The Northman rose to. I think of Nosferatu the same way I think of The Witch. I really like The Witch. I admire that movie. Ralph Ineson is really good in that movie. Anya Taylor-Joy is the breakout star of that movie. But it's not a film I feel like I have to revisit all of the time, the way that I do with The Lighthouse, the way that I do with The Northman. I guess what I'm really saying is, I wish that The Northman was the hit that Nosferatu has become. I wish all of the talk surrounding Eggers was about The Northman over Nosferatu, and maybe that's unfair, because Nosferatu is a really good film. Here's maybe the best way of putting it. There are other directors I believe out there capable of making a very good Nosferatu adaptation. There are not other directors out there capable of making the movies The Lighthouse and The Northman. I do think it's worth noting that I've only seen this movie once, and it is possible that it is a movie that will grow on me over time. And again, that's not to say I don't like the movie. I really do. I think it's super well made. It looks good. It's well acted. Maybe I just went in with way too much of high expectations for what I thought this movie was going to be. If you've seen the other works of Robert Eggers, I just don't know how you walk out of this movie and say, this is the best movie he's made. It's just not. I just think it's a fact that this is not his best movie. You can make the argument for The Lighthouse. You can make the argument for The Northman. I even think you can make the argument for The Witch, because that's a really great debut. I just don't think you can make the argument for Nosferatu. It shows what he's capable of. In the end, I just think it's missing that spark that's in his other movies. I really didn't mean for this podcast to come out so negatively. I've talked about the performances of this movie that I really liked. I think the filmmaking is very strong. I just think so highly of Robert Eggers as a writer-director that I hold him to such a high standard, and I think that's a good thing, actually, that I have a history with this director, and I don't just love every movie he makes. I kind of challenge myself to look at it and go, do I think this movie is a masterpiece? And right now, I do not think Nosferatu is in the masterpiece level of filmmaking. I think it is a very good, not great movie. And to end on a high note, I'll say this. I believe the best of Robert Eggers as a writer-director is still yet to come. And even though I'm not as high on Nosferatu as other people, I'm still glad that this writer-director, Robert Eggers, is having a moment, because his filmography over the past decade is super impressive. The Witch, The Lighthouse, The Northman, and now Nosferatu. That's a stellar start to a career. When I'm a fan of a writer-director like Robert Eggers, I want them to become the biggest names possible because I want their movies to feel like events. I want to mention the title of their movies and for everyone in the room to know what I'm talking about. And I think Robert Eggers is well on his way to becoming one of those filmmakers in that rarefied air where people go, oh, he made a movie, we have to go out and see it. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I highly recommend you check out Nosferatu. Next week on the podcast, I'm talking about Justin Kurzel's The Order, starring Jude Law and Nicholas Hoult. So tune into that, and please rate, review, and subscribe.